General Hospital will reveal Molly's heart felt like it was being squeezed in an unrelenting vice as she gazed at her father, Rick, lying motionless on the hospital bed. Unconscious after a devastating car accident. Every beat of her heart was heavy with fear and disbelief, the air around her thick with tension. Her mind raced. A single thought consuming her: Kristina was to blame for this. Her younger sister's reckless actions had set off a chain of events that had led to this horrifying moment. Rick, the man who had been her protector, her anchor, was now fighting for his life, and Molly couldn't shake the feeling that it was all because of Kristina's ill-fated decision. As Rick was rushed into the emergency room at General Hospital, Molly could hardly breathe. Each second that passed felt like an eternity. Her chest tightened with anxiety as she waited for any news. Any sign that her father would pull through. She found herself praying, silently begging for him to wake up, for this nightmare to end. But the dread inside her was overpowering, drowning out any hope. What if she lost him? What if she never saw his smile again, never heard his voice, never felt his reassuring presence in her life? Molly's mind replayed the events leading up to the crash over and over again. She couldn't escape the image of Kristina, her sister, someone she loved, being the catalyst for all this pain. It was Kristina who had been involved in a reckless act of revenge against Ava, and in her quest for vengeance, she had sabotaged Ava's car, never intending for anyone to get hurt. But in the end, it was Rick and Elizabeth who paid the price for Kristina's misguided actions. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Kristina hadn't meant to hurt anyone, yet now, her decisions had put two innocent lives in jeopardy. Molly couldn't ignore the truth. If it weren't for Kristina's rash plan, Rick wouldn't be lying there, struggling for his life. The more Molly thought about it, the more the anger and frustration surged inside her. Her emotions were a tempest, a whirlwind of betrayal and helplessness. She had always protected Kristina. Always tried to understand her, but now, in the face of such overwhelming pain, Molly found it impossible to keep her composure. She couldn't stop herself from thinking that if Kristina had just thought things through, if she hadn't let her emotions cloud her judgment, none of this would have happened. Her sister's need for vengeance had caused an irreversible disaster, and now, Molly was left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. As the hours stretched on, and Molly stood by Rick's bedside, she couldn't help but feel the sting of disappointment. Kristina, her own flesh and blood, had made a devastating mistake, one that could cost them everything. The pain of losing Rick, of not knowing whether he would survive this horrific ordeal, was almost too much to bear. But what stung the most was the fact that the person responsible for this was someone who should have been on her side, someone she should have been able to trust above all else. Molly's heart ached as she thought about the toll this would take on her family. She had already suffered so much, losing her child, going through the painful breakup with TJ, and witnessing the tragic events surrounding Sam's fate. But now, to face the potential loss of her father, the one person who had always been there for her, was a reality she couldn't fathom. The weight of it all threatened to crush her. Her emotions were raw, a volatile mix of grief, anger, and fear. Her thoughts turned to Kristina. Could she ever forgive her for this? Could she ever look at her sister the same way again after everything that had happened? Molly wasn't sure. She didn't know if she had the strength to forgive someone who had put her family through so much pain. The betrayal cut deep, and Molly's anger burned bright, leaving her with little room for understanding. She couldn't help but feel that Kristina needed to face the consequences of her actions. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about responsibility. About acknowledging the damage caused by a thoughtless act. As the days went on, the situation remained tense. Rick's condition fluctuated, and every time Molly saw the faintest improvement, it was quickly followed by a new wave of fear. Would he ever be the same again? Would he ever wake up? It was impossible to predict, and that uncertainty gnawed at Molly's soul. The doctors remained cautious in their prognosis, but there was still a glimmer of hope. Deep down, Molly couldn't shake the feeling that she had to prepare herself for the worst, just in case. Yet, despite the overwhelming dread, Molly knew one thing for certain: Kristina's actions had shattered something inside their family, something that might never be repaired. The rift between them was growing, and Molly could feel it widening with every passing moment. Kristina would have to face the consequences of her decisions. And Molly would have to decide if she could ever forgive her for the harm she had caused. But that was a battle for another time. For now, all that mattered was Rick, whether he would make it through this ordeal, and whether he would ever be the same man he had been before this terrible tragedy. As Molly sat by her father's bedside, the weight of what had happened slowly began to sink in. She could barely comprehend the extent of the situation, but there was one undeniable truth that cut through her thoughts. Kristina had caused it all. Her younger sister's actions, reckless and impulsive, had been the spark that ignited this horrific chain of events. When the realization hit Molly that it was Kristina who had sabotaged Ava's car, setting off the tragic crash that had left Rick in critical condition, her emotions exploded. She could no longer keep her composure, her body trembling with a mixture of fury and disbelief. Molly had always prided herself on being the calm one, the peacemaker in the family. But this was different. This was personal. This was her father's life hanging in the balance, and it was all because Kristina had let her emotions take control. She couldn't fathom how anyone, especially someone she loved so dearly, could be responsible for putting Rick in this dangerous situation. How could Kristina have been so careless, so blinded by her need for vengeance? The anger that bubbled up inside Molly was unlike anything she had ever felt before. Her heart ached. Not only because of her father's condition but because of the deep sense of betrayal she felt from the one person she thought she could trust the most, her sister. Her thoughts were clouded with the horrifying possibility that Rick might not survive this. The idea of losing him was something Molly couldn't even begin to accept. He was the one constant in her life, the person she had always turned to, no matter what life threw their way. The thought of never hearing his voice again, never feeling the warmth of his embrace, was unbearable. The pain of that loss was enough to bring Molly to her knees, and it was only made worse by the fact that Kristina's actions had put them all in this position. Molly's mind continued to replay the events over and over, but she couldn't stop herself from thinking that if Kristina hadn't made that rash decision, none of this would have happened. Rick wouldn't be in the hospital, clinging to life, and Elizabeth wouldn't have been caught in the crossfire. If Kristina had just stopped and thought about the consequences, if she had considered the impact of her actions, they wouldn't be facing the most terrifying moment of their lives. The more Molly thought about it, the more she couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. Kristina had let her emotions get the best of her, and now their father was paying the price. Molly had already been through so much in the past year. She had lost her child, gone through the excruciating heartbreak of a breakup with TJ, and dealt with the crushing tragedy surrounding Sam. Her heart had been broken too many times already. But now, the possibility of losing Rick, the man who had always been there for her, was almost too much to bear. This was a loss she didn't know how to cope with. Her world had already been turned upside down, and now it seemed that everything she had once held dear was slipping away. All because of her sister's rash decisions. The weight of it all was suffocating, and Molly found herself questioning how she would ever be able to move forward. How could she ever forgive Kristina for causing this? The anger she felt was justified, how could she not be angry? But part of her was also terrified that she would never be able to look at her sister the same way again. The bond they had once shared felt irrevocably broken. Shattered by the consequences of Kristina's actions. How could they ever go back to the way things were? Would their relationship ever heal from this? For now, all Molly could do was wait. She couldn't undo what had happened, and she couldn't change the past. All she could do was pray that Rick would survive, that somehow, against all odds, he would make it through this. But as each minute passed, the uncertainty weighed heavily on her. Would he wake up? Would he be the same? Or was this the end? Molly couldn't bear to think of a life without him. But in the back of her mind, she couldn't help but prepare herself for the worst. It was a heartbreaking reality, and no matter how much she wished it weren't true, she knew that things could never be the same again. Kristina's mistake had taken something precious from Molly, and now, as she faced the devastating consequences of it all, she realized that forgiveness might take a long time, if it was even possible at all. Rick had been her rock, the person who had stood by her through all of life's struggles, offering guidance, strength, and unconditional love. He had always been there for her, offering a sense of stability in the chaos that often defined their family. But now, as Rick lay unconscious in the hospital after the accident, Molly couldn't help but feel the walls of her world closing in around her. The thought of losing him was more than she could bear. And it left her reeling. How could she survive without the one person who had always been there to protect her? How could she go on if Rick didn't make it? The weight of everything that had happened in her life seemed to crash down on Molly all at once. The grief from losing her child, the anguish over the end of her relationship with TJ. And now the overwhelming fear that she could lose Rick. It was all too much. The pain and uncertainty began to fuel a fire deep inside her, a fire that pushed her to seek justice, to find answers, and to hold someone accountable for what had happened. For the first time in a long while, Molly was determined to do whatever it took to make things right. To reclaim some sense of control over her life and the situation she found herself in. Her anger, which had already been simmering beneath the surface for weeks, now began to boil over. She felt a deep, uncontrollable rage at the world for taking so much from her, and rage at Kristina for being the catalyst that had brought this nightmare to life. Molly could no longer hold back her feelings toward her younger sister. Every time she thought about the accident, every time she saw Kristina, the anger swelled inside her. It was impossible for her to reconcile the fact that the sister she had always tried to protect, the sister she had always tried to understand, was now the one responsible for bringing so much pain and devastation into their lives. The emotional toll of it all was becoming unbearable. And Molly found herself struggling to control her emotions. In her mind, Kristina was the one who had caused all of this. It was Kristina's recklessness, her desperate need for revenge, that had led to Rick being in that hospital bed. It didn't matter that Kristina never meant to hurt anyone, that didn't change the fact that her actions had set this entire tragedy in motion. Kristina had acted impulsively, without considering the consequences, and now Molly was left to pick up the pieces. The rage she felt toward her sister wasn't just about the accident. It was about all the pain that had come before it, all the ways Kristina's actions had hurt their family over the years. It was about the loss of trust, the erosion of the bond they had once shared. Molly's mind raced as she tried to make sense of everything. She was caught in a whirlwind of grief, anger, and fear, with no clear way out. The pressure was mounting. And it seemed like there was no end in sight. But one thing was clear, Molly was no longer the person she had been before all of this. She was no longer the hopeful, understanding sister who always tried to protect Kristina. The pain and anger she felt had transformed her into someone who was determined to get answers, to seek justice, and to hold those responsible for the pain they had caused her family. As Molly struggled to come to terms with everything that had happened, she couldn't help but wonder if there was any hope for healing between her and Kristina. Could they ever move past this? Or would the rift between them be the final straw that broke their relationship forever? Molly didn't know, but one thing was certain, she couldn't move forward until she had justice. Until she could confront the person who had shattered her world. And right now, that person was Kristina. Rick will have to fight with everything he has to overcome this challenge. And while there are many signs that point to his eventual recovery, the moments of anxiety and tension will continue to haunt Molly. Every time she looks at him, her heart races. And the fear of the worst still lingers in her mind. No matter how much hope she tries to hold on to. The uncertainty of his condition makes it nearly impossible for her to feel any real sense of relief. The doctors are doing everything they can, but the wait for updates seems endless. Molly can't shake the feeling that, no matter how much time passes, she's still teetering on the edge of losing him forever. She finds herself questioning whether she is truly prepared for the worst outcome, but no answer ever comes. The fear that Rick might not survive is ever present. And she can't stop herself from imagining a life without him. As each day passes, Molly is forced to confront the reality of what she might lose, and it drives her to become more determined. More desperate to keep everything from spiraling out of control. She watches her family fall apart, helpless to stop the devastation from spreading. The pressure of trying to stay strong for Rick. To hold her family together while also managing the overwhelming weight of her own emotions, is taking a toll on her. Every new setback with Rick's condition feels like a punch to the gut. And her mind is consumed with thoughts of what might happen next. Can she hold it together? Can her family heal from this? Or will it all crumble into chaos? Kristina, on the other hand, will have to face the consequences of her reckless actions. Her need for revenge against Ava has now led to something far more devastating, and the guilt she feels will weigh heavily on her. Kristina never intended for anyone to get hurt, but the damage has already been done. She must now confront the reality that her impulsive decision has put her entire family in jeopardy. The road to redemption will not be easy, and it's unclear whether Kristina can truly atone for what she has done. Time will tell if she can find a way to make amends for the hurt she's caused. But for now, all she can do is live with the consequences of her actions. For Molly, the path ahead is uncertain, and the fear of losing Rick, combined with the betrayal she feels from Kristina, will leave her questioning everything she thought she knew about family, loyalty, and forgiveness. Can the sisters ever repair their fractured bond, or has the damage been done beyond repair? The coming episodes of General Hospital promise to reveal the true extent of the fallout from this tragedy. And the impact it will have on the lives of those involved will leave viewers on the edge of their seats.